Welcome to Night Whispers, where darkness drifts close earth, quieter than night becomes. Here, you'll find stories not meant to jolt you awake, but to follow you softly into sleep, carrying shadows that stay long after the final word. Tonight's story is one you may not want to hear alone. They say some ambulances still drive at night, even when no one calls them. No sirens, no flashing lights, just the faint sound of wheels rolling through empty streets. The patients they collect, they were never meant to be saved. This is the night ambulance. Asterisk, the night was quiet. The kind of quiet that settles into your skin and makes every sound sharper, every shadow darker. The city streets were damp from an earlier rain, neon reflections stretching across the asphalt like broken glass. I had just finished my shift at the hospital and was walking toward the bus stop when I heard it. The low hum of an engine in the distance. Not a car, not a truck. It had that unmistakable cadence, that slow, steady rumble I had heard 1,000 times during emergencies. An ambulance, but there was no siren, no lights cutting through the night, just the shape of it rolling out of the fog, its paint dull, its windows tinted too dark to see inside. My first thought was that it was some outdated model, one that hadn't been retired properly, but as it drew closer, something in my gut twisted. The headlights were dim, almost yellow, and the way it moved, too smooth, too deliberate, felt wrong. Like it wasn't driving, but gliding. It slowed near me, engine idling like a patient heartbeat. The back doors creaked open on their own. For a long moment, I just stood there, frozen. I could smell something faint drifting out, antiseptic mixed with rust. The way abandoned hospital wings often smell when no one's been inside for years. A single stretcher sat in the shadows of the interior. Clean, perfectly white sheets, stretched tight across it, waiting. Need a ride? The voice came from nowhere. I spun, but the street was empty. My throat tightened as I realized the words hadn't been spoken aloud. They had arrived in my head, whispered directly into my thoughts. I took a step back. The ambulance engine revved once, as if impatient. Come along, it's time. I don't remember deciding to run, but my legs carried me down the block before. My mind caught up. When I finally turned back, the ambulance was gone. No sound, no taillights, nothing. The street was empty, as if it had never been there. By the time I reached home, I had almost convinced myself I was imagining things. A long shift, exhaustion, the kind of fatigue that blurs dreams with waking. I locked the door, shut the curtains, and told myself to forget it. But forgetting wasn't easy, because when I woke the next morning, there was mud on my shoes. Mud streaked with streaks of faint, dried blood. And in my pocket, tucked inside, a folded napkin, was a slip of paper I had never seen before. A patient chart. Name, Thomas Keller. Status, deceased. 2:14 a.m. Location, collected eastbound, 5th and Ash. That was the very street where the ambulance had stopped for me. The date matched last night and the time. 2:14 a.m. Exactly when I had been standing there, staring into the open doors of that impossible ambulance. Asterisk, sleep didn't come easy after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the glow of those yellow headlights cutting through the fog, the stretcher inside waiting like a blank invitation. By morning, I had nearly convinced myself it was a hallucination brought on by exhaustion. But the patient chart on my nightstand told a different story. The name, Thomas Keller, wouldn't leave me alone. He wasn't one of mine, not a patient I had treated. not someone I even recognized. Yet the clinical neatness of the handwriting, the smudged hospital code in the corner, felt official. Too official to be a prank. I couldn't take it to the police. How would that sound? An ambulance with no siren delivered a death notice to me in the middle of the night. No, I needed someone who would actually believe me, or at least humor me enough to dig into it. That's when I thought of Dr. Reiner. He had been a physician at St. Joseph's longer than anyone else, a relic of the old guard. He knew things about the hospital that newer staff never bothered to ask about: unmarked basements, wings that had been shut down after accidents, stories whispered only during overnight shifts. I caught him in the cafeteria that afternoon. His tray was empty except for a black coffee, steam curling against his lined face. He looked up when I approached, and his eyes narrowed instantly. "You've seen it," he said. Before I even sat down, I froze. "What?" "The ambulance." He sipped his coffee slowly. "Tell me what it showed you." The hairs on my arms prickled. I hadn't told a soul. Not one word. "How do you?" He held up a hand. "It doesn't matter. They never stop at the first sighting. Once you've been noticed, it keeps coming back." My throat was dry. "You're telling me this happens to others?" He nodded once. "It's been around as long as I've been here. Some say longer. Back when the city still ran horse-drawn carriages, there were stories of a black wagon that collected the sick before dawn. Now it wears the skin of an ambulance. Same function, different uniform." I slid the patient chart across the table. "Then explain this." He studied the paper, his jaw tightening as he read. "Keller, heart failure, eastbound, 5th and Ash. Yes, it fits." "Fits what?" "The pattern." He leaned in closer. "Every time it appears, someone dies. Within minutes, usually nearby. The chart is its calling card, proof that the collection was made. It doesn't just carry the dead, it decides who belongs to the dead." I wanted to laugh, to dismiss it all, but the weight in his voice left no room for disbelief. "So what does it want with me?" I asked. "That depends." His eyes darkened. "Did you step inside?" "No." "Then you still have time." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "But it will return. Once chosen, you're never invisible to it again." The words hung heavy between us. Later, back in the ward, I looked up Thomas Keller's name in the records. Sure enough, there he was. Time of death confirmed, 2:14 a.m. Cardiac arrest, no prior warning, no resuscitation attempted. It was logged, clinically, coldly, with the same precision as every other patient record. But the detail that froze me was this: body collected before paramedics arrived. That wasn't possible. Unless Keller's body had been taken by something else. That night, I avoided the bus. I took a cab straight home, curtains drawn tight, television left on for company. Midnight crept closer, and my pulse quickened with each passing minute. I told myself nothing would happen, that it had been a single freak occurrence. Then, at 2:12 a.m., I heard it, that low, deliberate hum outside my window. I stood frozen in my darkened apartment, watching the faint glow crawl across my living room wall as headlights swept the street. I dared not peek outside. I didn't have to. I already knew the ambulance had returned, and this time, it wasn't idling at the corner. It was parked directly outside my building. Asterisk, asterisk, I didn't breathe for what felt like an eternity. The hum of the engine was steady, patient, as though it had all the time in the world. Through the sliver of curtain, I could see a glow lingering on the pavement, faint and unnatural against the fog. I told myself not to look, but fear is a curious thing. It draws you forward even as it tells you to run. Slowly, carefully, I parted the curtain. The ambulance sat directly across the street. Its headlights glowed a sickly yellow, not bright but pulsing, as though alive. The back doors were closed. This time, but I knew what was inside. I didn't need to see the stretcher again to feel its invitation. And then, movement. The passenger door opened with a hiss, and for the first time, I saw the driver. He was tall, unnervingly thin, his uniform not quite matching the standard paramedics, outdated somehow. The cut of the fabric, more like something from decades ago. His cap shadowed his face, but his skin was pale, almost grey, as though he hadn't seen sunlight in years. He stepped into the glow of the headlights and looked directly at my window. I stumbled back, my heart hammering, certain he could see me. His head tilted slightly, as if acknowledging my presence. Then, without a word, he climbed back into the driver's seat. The engine rumbled, but instead of pulling away, the back doors creaked open. My stomach dropped. Two figures sat inside. They weren't strapped to the stretcher. They were sitting, upright, side by side, their heads bowed. Their hospital gowns hung loose on thin frames, skin waxy and colorless. And as I watched, both figures lifted their heads in unison. Their eyes met mine through the fogged glass. Dead eyes, I staggered backward, the curtain slipping shut. My chest heaved, sweat soaking my shirt, my mind screaming at me to run, to leave, to do anything but stand frozen. But my legs refused to move. Minutes passed. The engine idled. I didn't dare look again. Then, as suddenly as it had come, the sound faded. I rushed to the window, heart in my throat, only to find the street empty. No headlights, no engine hum, just the quiet rustle of leaves and the faint drip of rain from the eaves. Asterisk, asterisk. It was gone. But I knew what I'd seen. The passengers, the driver, the way their eyes seemed to pierce through glass, fog, and shadow. They weren't bodies. They weren't alive either. They were something caught in between, and the ambulance carried them like cargo. Sleep was impossible after that. I sat awake until dawn, every creak of the building setting my nerves on edge. By morning, I had made up my mind. I couldn't face this alone anymore. I returned to Dr. Reiner. He wasn't surprised to see me. In fact, he looked as though he had been waiting. "You saw them, didn't you?" he asked softly. "The passengers," I whispered. Asterisk, 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 asterisk.
He nodded gravely. "They're the ones who've been taken but not yet processed, for lack of a better word. The ambulance doesn't always deliver its passengers right away. Sometimes, it keeps them. Sometimes, it shows them. Shows them. Why? To break you." His voice cracked like brittle wood. "Once you see the faces, you start to understand that it's not random. The people inside are connected to you, one way or another. Some you'll know. Others you won't, not yet. But you will." I shivered. I didn't recognize them. "Not now." "But you will," he repeated, the certainty in his voice chilled me more than the vision itself that I wanted to demand answers, who the driver was, why it chose me, what it wanted. But before I could, a nurse burst into the lounge, her face pale, code blue. "East Wing." Dr. Reiner stood immediately, his chair scraping across the floor. He glanced back at me, eyes haunted. "Stay close." Don't go out at night. But of course, I did, because that night, curiosity overpowered fear that I found myself standing at the window once more, waiting, dreading, knowing, and right on time. The hum began again, only this time, the ambulance didn't stop on the street that I turned the corner, and headed straight for me. The engine's hum vibrated through the walls before I even saw the headlights. My apartment window trembled, the glass rattling faintly in its frame. I pressed myself against the wall, too afraid to look out, yet every nerve in me demanded that I see. That I inched toward the curtain, my breath shallow. The glow grew brighter, seeping through the fabric like liquid firelight. With trembling fingers, I pulled the cloth aside. The ambulance was no longer parked across the street. That it was directly beneath my window. The roof of the vehicle gleamed wet in the drizzle, streaks of water catching the yellow glare of its headlights. My heart slammed against my ribs. The front doors were closed, but the driver's shadow was visible behind the windshield, tall, rigid, waiting. Then his head turned, and in that moment, I saw his face. The cap no longer shadowed him. His skin was stretched tight, gray and waxen, but his eyes, they burned. Not with life, not with humanity, but with a dull, phosphorescent glow that pulsed in rhythm with the engine. That he was staring straight at me. That I stumbled back, gasping, my spine pressing hard against the opposite wall. But still, I couldn't look away. His gaze was an anchor, dragging me down into some deep, wordless abyss. My knees buckled. For a terrifying second, I thought I would lose consciousness, and then the back door swung open. The sound was sharp, metallic, final. That I didn't want to see. I couldn't bear to see. Yet my eyes betrayed me. The passengers were there again. Not two this time, but four. They sat in rows, their bodies stiff, their heads lolling. Their mouths moved, soundless, as though whispering a chant too faint for mortal ears. One of them looked familiar. The realization slammed into me like cold water. It was my old neighbor, Mr. Harlow. He died 2 years ago of a stroke. I'd attended his funeral, watched the casket lower into the ground, but here he was, swaying slightly in his seat, his sunken eyes boring into mine. That my stomach churned. I staggered, clutching the windowsill for balance. The driver raised a single bony hand and gestured toward the open doors. An invitation. That I tore myself away from the window, shaking, every cell screaming to run. My apartment door felt miles away, but somehow I reached it, fumbling with the lock. The hallway outside was dark, oppressive, stretching long and empty in both directions. That I bolted down the stairs, each step echoing far too loudly. At the bottom, I slammed into the main exit, throwing it open. Cold night air hit my face like a slap, but the street was empty. The ambulance was gone. No headlights. No engine. Just silence. That I stood there, gasping, drenched in sweat. My neighbors slept behind their doors, oblivious, untouched. Yet I knew I hadn't imagined it. My body still trembled with the weight of what I'd seen. The driver had looked at me. Directly at me. That I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat hunched over at my kitchen table, a single lamp burning, trying to make sense of it all. Why me? Why now? What did it want? The only person who might have answers was Dr. Reiner. By morning, I found myself back in his office, my hands shaking as I told him everything. His expression darkened with every word. You saw his eyes, he said quietly. It wasn't a question. Yes, I whispered. And the passengers. More of them this time. One of them was someone I knew. Reiner leaned forward, his voice dropping. That's how it starts. It shows you strangers first. Then, the faces you know. It's pulling you closer, weaving you into its route. Route? The ambulance isn't random, he said, his tone grave. It follows a pattern, a circuit of death. Hospitals, homes, alleys, anywhere life slips into silence. It doesn't just collect. It delivers. Delivers where? Reiner's eyes glistened, haunted. That, no one alive has ever returned to tell. The silence between us was unbearable. My pulse thundered in my ears, and then he said something that froze my blood completely. The fact that you saw the driver's eyes means you're already on the list. Once you've been noticed, it's only a matter of time. His words stayed with me, gnawing like rats in the dark, because deep down, I already knew he was right. The rain had stopped, but the streets were slick and shiny, reflecting the dim glow of streetlights in fractured patterns. I walked fast, careful to avoid puddles that might betray my presence with a splash. My thoughts raced, circling around Dr. Reiner's warning, once you're noticed, it's only a matter of time. That I should have stayed home, hidden beneath blankets, but some force, fear, curiosity, or sheer stupidity, drove me outside. I had to see. I had to know if it was real. The distant wail of a siren made my pulse spike. My stomach twisted. I didn't need it to be real, and yet here it was again, the ambulance, emerging from the fog at the far end of the street. The headlights cut through the darkness like twin blades, and the engine hummed with an unnatural rhythm, not loud, not soft, but deep in resonance with something in my chest. That I froze at the corner, watching as it approached. The familiar shape of the driver appeared in the windshield, eyes glowing faintly in the dim light, scanning the street, and then I saw her. A woman stood at the curb, her umbrella useless against the rain-slicked wind. She waved at the ambulance as if expecting it. I realized too late that she wasn't waving for help in the normal sense. She was signaling something darker, inviting something she could not resist. The ambulance stopped in front of her, doors sliding open silently. The driver didn't move, but the vehicle exuded an almost magnetic pull. The woman stepped forward, her hesitation brief, then she was inside. The doors closed with a snap that echoed unnaturally across the empty street. That I couldn't move. My feet were glued to the wet asphalt. The ambulance's lights flickered once, twice, then it drove off, leaving behind a faint fog that smelled metallic and electric, like iron left out in a storm. I followed at a distance, my breathing shallow, my mind screaming that I shouldn't, that I had already seen too much. The vehicle stopped at an alley, the kind that smelled of rot and forgotten things. I ducked behind a dumpster, peering through the shadows. The back doors opened again. I caught glimpses of more passengers, 3, for this time, all motionless, all staring straight ahead. The driver didn't speak, didn't gesture. The passengers stepped out, floating almost, their feet not quite touching the wet ground. One of them, a young man in a hoodie I recognized from my morning jog, blinked at me with empty eyes. My stomach lurched. The driver turned his head slightly, scanning the street. Then, as if sensing my presence, he raised one bony hand. I ducked lower, pressing myself against the cold bricks of the alley, and that's when I realized, this wasn't a normal pickup. The ambulance opened its doors, revealing an interior that seemed impossibly deep, like it stretched into another dimension. The passengers entered as though drawn by invisible strings. When the doors closed, the vehicle shrank back to its normal size, leaving only the sound of wet tires on asphalt and the faint echo of distant whispers. That I ran. My lungs burned. Every instinct screamed that I should go home, lock every door, and pretend I hadn't seen a thing. But part of me, some morbid curiosity, needed to know more. I had to track it, to see where it went, to understand why it existed. By the time I reached the street corner where it had first appeared, the ambulance was gone. No fog, no siren, no engine hum. Only the darkness, oppressive and heavy, pressed against me like a weight. The next day, I tried to live normally. I went to work, nodded at coworkers, laughed when prompted, but the image of the glowing eyes haunted me. I could feel them, even when they weren't there, piercing through walls, through my thoughts, through my very being. That night, the ambulance returned. This time, it didn't stop for anyone else. It stopped for me. The headlights illuminated the sidewalk, and I froze mid-step. I could see the interior clearly, empty, yet somehow teeming with the presence of the lost souls it carried. The driver's eyes were fixed on me, glowing brighter, warmer, almost inviting. That I knew what I was supposed to do. Step inside. Accept whatever fate had chosen for me. That I didn't move. The driver raised a hand again. Slowly, deliberately, and then, a voice, low and hollow, echoed from the empty street. It's your turn. I stumbled back, my heart hammering. The ambulance's engine roared, not a mechanical sound, but something alive, a beast under its skin. And before I could even consider running, the doors began to open on their own. A cold wind hit me, carrying the unmistakable scent of iron and decay. I wanted to scream, to run, to resist, but my legs refused. Something deeper, older, was pulling me forward, closer to the edge of the street where the vehicle waited. That I closed my eyes and counted. 1, 2, 3, and then I ran. That I ran past the ambulance, past the alley, past the fog, not daring to look back. The sound of tires spinning on wet asphalt echoed behind me, faint at first, then closer, then gone. By the time I reached my apartment, drenched and shivering, the street was empty. Only the echo of the driver's voice lingered in my mind. You can't hide forever. I didn't sleep again that night. And I realized that the only reason I hadn't been taken was because I hesitated. Next time, hesitation might not save me. The city was quieter than usual, as if it, too, feared the ambulance. The streets glistened with leftover rain, streetlights reflecting in puddles like shattered glass. I moved cautiously, careful not to make a sound, my mind replaying every detail of the previous night. The glowing eyes, the hollow voice, the cold wind, they all haunted me, relentless in their persistence. That I had to see where it went. I had to understand it. Curiosity and terror waged a war inside me, neither willing to yield. My path led me to the hospital, a place I had once thought safe, mundane. Now, it felt like a different world, distorted, waiting. The main entrance was empty, fluorescent lights flickering in irregular intervals. I slipped inside, keeping to the shadows, listening. Each step echoed unnaturally, bouncing off walls painted in sterile white. The smell of antiseptic clashed with a metallic scent I couldn't place. Something was here, something that didn't belong. Down the corridor, I caught a glimpse of movement. At first, I thought it was a janitor, but no, the figure moved too silently, too deliberately, its shape blurred, almost shifting with the light. My pulse quickened. I crouched behind a wheelchair, peering around the corner. The ambulance was inside, not the front doors, not parked outside. It was here, in the hallway, its presence impossible yet undeniable. The back doors opened slowly, revealing the empty interior glowing with a pale, unnatural light. Shadows moved inside, long and thin, stretching in impossible ways. From the darkness beyond, a nurse appeared, her uniform stained, shoes squeaking on the polished floor. But her eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, betrayed her. She floated toward the ambulance as though compelled by some invisible force. Another figure emerged, a doctor with a clipboard, lifeless, dragging feet that didn't touch the floor completely. That I wanted to run, but my legs were frozen. Every instinct screamed to flee, yet my mind, twisted by curiosity, demanded I stay. The ambulance seemed to breathe, subtly, like it had a heart of its own. Doors closed on their own accord, lights dimmed and flickered. The figures entered one by one, silently, without hesitation. The driver waited, eyes glowing brighter, scanning the corridor. That I realized then, it wasn't just picking up the living or the dead. It was choosing, marking those who had lingered too long, who had seen too much. That I moved closer, creeping along the walls, desperate to see what would happen next. The air grew colder, each breath visible as it escaped my lungs. The hum of fluorescent lights combined with the faint, hollow breathing of the ambulance to create a rhythm that seemed almost sentient. That a child appeared at the far end of the corridor, small, wearing pajamas. Her eyes were vacant, yet full of recognition. She approached the ambulance without fear, hands outstretched as though accepting some unseen offering. My stomach churned. I wanted to intervene, to pull her back, but the moment I stepped forward, the driver turned. His eyes glowed sharply, and I felt it, a pressure on my chest, a warning. Step closer, and I would vanish, just like the others. Step back, and I would live to watch another night. That I held my breath, crouching lower, observing. The child entered, the doors closed, and the ambulance seemed to sigh, as if satisfied. Then, in a blink, it was gone, leaving the corridor empty, sterile, yet heavy with the lingering essence of what had occurred. That I leaned against the wall, hands shaking. I knew the hospital wouldn't be normal again. Shadows lingered where none should exist, whispers traced my steps, faint but insistent. And I understood, this was not a place of healing anymore. It was a waypoint, a liminal space where the living and the dead were separated only by the choice of the driver. I stumbled out of the hospital into the empty street. Rain had started again, lightly, tapping against my coat. The city seemed awake, yet unaware of the horrors hiding in plain sight. I realized that no one else could see it, not fully. Only those who had been touched by its presence, those who had lingered too long, could perceive the truth. Night after night, the ambulance would appear. And night after night, it would choose. I had been marked the first time I saw it, my hesitation saving me, but only temporarily. Every shadow I passed, every street I crossed, every flickering light reminded me that my time was limited. That I returned to my apartment, but sleep eluded me. The empty corridor of the hospital haunted my thoughts. Each creak of my apartment floorboard sounded like the wheels of the ambulance rolling silently through dark streets. I could feel its eyes, glowing faintly in the darkness, waiting, always waiting. By morning, I had a plan, or at least a fragile strategy. I would follow it, track it, understand it. I knew the risks. I knew the driver would notice. But the pull of knowledge, the hunger to see beyond the veil, outweighed fear, and so, I waited for night to fall. Night fell heavier than usual, a velvet darkness that pressed against the city streets. I stayed close to the shadows, my eyes scanning every alley, every flickering streetlight. The ambulance would come again. I could feel it in my bones, an inevitability I could neither deny nor escape. The first signs were subtle: the distant hum of tires on wet pavement, a soft glow from behind corners, shadows that stretched unnaturally. I followed, keeping my distance, heart pounding, every instinct screaming to run, yet every ounce of my being drawn forward by fascination, by necessity. That I turned a corner and saw it, parked in the middle of the empty avenue, its siren silent, yet its presence overwhelming. The light from inside spilled onto the pavement in thin, pale ribbons, illuminating the fog that rolled lazily along the asphalt. The driver's figure was rigid, eyes glowing faintly, scanning the streets for the next mark. That I noticed movement within the ambulance. A figure, smaller than the others I had seen before, crouched on the floor. Its features were obscured by the dim glow, but I recognized it instantly: a young man, probably in his 20s, his clothes wet and muddied, eyes wide with fear and disbelief. The driver extended a hand, and the man slowly, almost reluctantly, moved toward it. That I clenched my fists, anger and fear mixing into a bitter cocktail. I wanted to intervene, to save him, but every fiber of my being knew the cost. The ambulance was no ordinary vehicle. It bent reality around it, and those who tried to defy it rarely survived. The man stepped inside, and the doors closed silently behind him. I froze, waiting, knowing I should look away but unable to. A faint sound reached my ears, a whisper almost too low to perceive. He was lost long before he stepped in. The ambulance moved. Slowly at first, then faster, gliding through the streets with an unnatural smoothness. The driver's eyes met mine through the rear window, and I felt the weight of their gaze, a silent warning that lingered long after the vehicle disappeared into the fog. That I followed, careful to maintain a safe distance. The streets twisted in ways I didn't recognize. Buildings seemed to bend, shadows pooling in corners that should have been empty. And always, the ambulance glided ahead, leading me deeper into the city, or perhaps into some other place altogether. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time seemed distorted here. I lost track of the familiar rhythm of the world outside. The ambulance stopped briefly at intersections, doors opening to allow shadows to enter or exit, figures that seemed human yet carried an aura of detachment, of death, drifting silently along with it. Finally, it reached an old warehouse at the edge of the city. The building had been abandoned for years, its windows broken, graffiti covering the walls. Yet the ambulance slid inside effortlessly, as if the structure itself were a living entity, bending to accommodate it. That I approached cautiously, heart in my throat, every step measured. The door to the warehouse was ajar, allowing a thin sliver of light to escape. Inside, the ambulance rested on the concrete floor, its back doors open, revealing the same pale, otherworldly glow. The young man was there, standing stiffly, his eyes vacant, yet aware that I could see the fear in him, even through the distance and the shadows. He didn't move when I called his name. He didn't respond. And then I understood, he wasn't entirely present. Part of him had been claimed by the ambulance, by the driver, leaving only a hollow shell behind. The driver appeared beside him, silently, impossibly, as if materialized from the shadows themselves. Their eyes met mine, and I felt a wave of dread wash over me. I realized then that I had been observed all along. Every movement, every step, every breath I had taken had been catalogued, measured, judged. The ambulance began to hum, a low, vibrating sound that resonated through the warehouse. Shadows inside it shifted, elongating, twisting, taking shapes that defied logic. The young man's form trembled, then stiffened, becoming rigid, as if pulled by invisible strings. That I had to act. I knew I couldn't stop the ambulance entirely, but perhaps I could delay it, disrupt the cycle, save at least a fragment of the lost passenger. I searched the warehouse quickly, my eyes landing on a metal beam hanging from the ceiling, thick and heavy. I lifted it with all my strength, timing my movement carefully. As the ambulance's doors began to close, I swung the beam, catching the vehicle's side with a loud clang. The metal shuddered, sparks flying, and for a moment, the vehicle wavered. The young man jerked violently, a flicker of awareness returning to his eyes. I shouted his name, urging him to move, to escape, to resist. The driver's gaze sharpened, and I felt a pull, a pressure that tried to drag me closer to the ambulance. I stumbled backward, clutching the beam, but I refused to release my hold. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and I realized the warehouse itself was reacting, the shadows stretching, the air thickening, trying to reclaim what had been disturbed. The young man finally moved, taking hesitant steps toward me. Each one seemed an effort, as if gravity itself resisted him. I reached out, and our hands met. For a moment, time slowed, the world holding its breath. Then, with a sudden burst of energy, we ran, moving toward the faint light of the warehouse exit. The ambulance hesitated, its doors open, lights flickering erratically. The driver's eyes bore into mine, a silent promise that this was not over, that the night was far from done. We crossed the threshold into the rainy streets, and I felt the pull weaken, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. That we didn't look back. Rain soaked us to the skin, mixing with sweat and adrenaline. The city felt alive again, normal, but we both knew the ambulance had only paused, not disappeared. Somewhere in the shadows, it waited, patient, relentless, ready for the next mark. By dawn, the young man's eyes had regained some life, though traces of the encounter lingered. He spoke little, only nodding in understanding when I mentioned the ambulance. Fear had tempered into a quiet vigilance, a shared knowledge of what lurked just beyond sight, and I realized something crucial. This wasn't just a vehicle. It was a force, an entity, tied to the liminal spaces between life and death, hunting patiently, selecting meticulously. Every night, it would claim someone new. And if we ever let our guard down, we would become its next passengers, silent, empty, forever lost. That I vowed then, as the first rays of sunlight cut through the clouds, that I would continue to track it, to understand it, to warn others. I didn't yet know how to stop it, but I knew that knowledge, awareness, and timing were my only weapons against its inexorable presence. And so, the hunt continued, each night more dangerous than the last, each encounter pushing me closer to the edge, yet compelling me forward. The lost passenger had been found, saved, at least temporarily, and the ambulance's relentless journey had revealed more of its terrifying purpose. That I knew one thing with certainty: the city would never be the same again. The city slept uneasily that night, unaware of the predator gliding silently among its streets. I had spent hours tracing the ambulance's movements, noting patterns, timing, and locations, hoping to predict its next appearance. Every instinct told me that tonight would be different, that the driver had sensed my interference, and that the final ride was coming. As the fog rolled in, thick and heavy, I stationed myself near an intersection I had observed the ambulance use repeatedly. Streetlights flickered in the mist, casting long, wavering shadows on the wet pavement. I gripped a flashlight and a small crowbar, the only weapons I had, though neither promised much against something so unnatural. My heart pounded in rhythm with the distant hum of tires, slow at first, then faster, until the familiar outline of the phantom ambulance emerged through the fog. Its lights glowed pale and unearthly, cutting through the night like a blade that I stepped into the street, forcing myself to be seen. The ambulance slowed, almost acknowledging me. The driver's eyes, impossibly bright, met mine through the windshield. A chill ran down my spine. I could feel the air thicken, reality itself bending around the vehicle. The back doors creaked open, revealing shadows that moved as if alive, waiting for the next passenger. From inside, I heard a whisper, the voice of the lost passenger from the previous night, trembling but still faintly aware. "Run, don't let it take you." My pulse spiked. This was my chance, my moment to intervene directly, to confront the entity that had haunted the city and claimed so many lives. That I moved closer, flashlight raised, shining its beam into the interior. Figures, shapes that should not have been, stirred inside. Faces, human but twisted, trapped between life and death, pressed against the glass. The driver's hand extended toward them, a silent command that froze their motion. I realized then that the ambulance wasn't just a vehicle, it was a cage, a collector of souls, each taken willingly or not, forced into obedience. The air vibrated as the ambulance shifted, tires sliding impossibly on the wet asphalt. I lunged, swinging the crowbar at the side, striking metal that rang hollow and deep. The impact caused a shudder that rippled through the vehicle, and for a moment, the shadows inside flickered, hesitation crossing their otherwise blank expressions. The driver's gaze intensified, and I felt the pull, an invisible force trying to drag me forward, into the ambulance, into the realm of the lost. My legs strained against it, every muscle screaming. I realized that I couldn't rely on brute force alone. I needed a strategy, a way to disrupt whatever tether bound the souls to this vehicle. That I noticed the siren. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but pulsing like a heartbeat. If I could stop the sound, perhaps I could weaken the connection, sever the link between the driver and the collected souls. I focused my energy, my mind tracing the rhythm, and when the ambulance slowed, I struck again with the crowbar, this time at the rear panel near the siren mechanism. Sparks flew. The siren shuddered, groaning, then fell silent. The effect was immediate. The shadows inside the ambulance twisted and writhed, a chorus of silent screams, their forms breaking and reforming in chaotic patterns. The lost passenger blinked, recognition and relief flickering across his face. You did it," he whispered. The driver's head snapped toward me. The pale eyes burned with fury. The air thickened, pressing against my chest as the ambulance tried to push forward, to reclaim control. I planted my feet, swinging the crowbar repeatedly, targeting weak points I had identified in its structure. Metal groaned, the vehicle rocked, and the ground trembled beneath its unnatural weight. The lost passenger moved closer, unsteady but determined. Together, we shoved, striking, yelling, defying the impossible force that sought to keep us trapped. Shadows poured out from the open doors, writhing, clawing at our feet, but we ignored them. Our combined effort became a rhythm, a battle against the unrelenting will of the ambulance. Then, a sudden shift, the vehicle lurched violently, tires skidding, lights flickering and dying. A deafening roar filled the street, a sound that was neither mechanical nor natural. I stumbled but held my ground, gripping the crowbar tighter. The driver's figure began to dissipate, unraveling like smoke caught in the wind. The ambulance's body trembled, metal warping, paint blistering as if the reality around it rejected its presence. The lost passenger cried out, "Now! Push it back!" With one final, coordinated effort, we shoved, striking the side again and again. The ambulance groaned, tilting, then rolled backward slowly, sliding into the fog. The shadows inside shrieked, twisting and fading as the vehicle moved away from the city streets. Silence fell. The fog thickened, swallowing the ambulance, erasing it from sight. My chest heaved, body trembling, but relief washed over me. The lost passenger stood beside me, alive, aware, breathing. We had disrupted the cycle, at least for now that we walked through the empty streets, rain washing over us, leaving only puddles and footprints as evidence of our confrontation. The city seemed unchanged, yet every corner, every alley, every distant light carried the memory of what had transpired. By morning, we returned to our respective lives, but the memory lingered. I knew the ambulance had not vanished. It would return, patient and deliberate, hunting again, selecting its next passenger. But now we had a measure of control, knowledge, and a way to fight back. Awareness was our weapon, vigilance our shield. That I kept a journal of every encounter, every observation, every pattern. I shared it sparingly, warning those I trusted. Every night, I walked the streets, always alert, always waiting, knowing that the ambulance could appear anywhere, and somewhere in the city, hidden in the fog, the night ambulance waits. Silent, relentless, a force between life and death. Its sirens are quiet, its doors always open, ready to collect those who wander too close, those who ignore the whispers, those who fail to heed the signs that we survived the final ride, but the story continues. Shadows linger in the corners, footsteps echo in empty alleys, and the memory of the ambulance haunts us, a reminder that some forces cannot be tamed, only understood. Tonight, it could return. Tomorrow, it may claim another. And the city, forever unaware, sleeps, dreaming, while the night ambulance watches, waits, and hunts. You've been listening to Night Whispers. Crescent Moon. If the story of the night ambulance kept you awake tonight, remember, the roads are never empty, even when they seem so. Don't forget to subscribe for more chilling tales every night. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep.